Paris, 1925. The city of light. A city that at first glance seemed unstoppable. Walk its streets and you'd see men in flat caps, women in shimmering flapper dresses, jazz drifting out of smoky cafes. On the boulevards, elegant cars hummed alongside horse-drawn carts. The world was changing, and Paris wore the mask of glamour proudly. But masks can hide scars. Because beneath the laughter, the dancing, and the beauty, Paris was still healing. The Great War had ended only 7 years before, and though the cannons had gone silent, the wounds remained. Families had been torn apart. Thousands of soldiers never came home. Unemployment ran high. Inflation ate at the wages of ordinary workers. It was a city caught between two worlds, celebration on the surface, desperation just beneath. And at the heart of that contradiction stood a monument, the Eiffel Tower. To millions, the tower was a marvel, a beacon of Paris, a symbol of progress. But to the French government, it was something else, a problem. It was costly to maintain. Repairs, upkeep, staff. The tower devoured money at a time when every franc mattered. And then the whispers began. Whispers at the tower, that great iron lady of Paris, might be dismantled, taken apart piece by piece and sold for scrap. For most, those were just rumors, nothing more than chatter in the cafes. But for one man, it was inspiration. He saw not a monument, but an opportunity. Not steel beams, but leverage. Not a tower, but a ticket to fortune. And his name would soon be written in the history of cons as one of the boldest tricksters who ever lived, Victor Lustig. And as Paris walked its boulevards in 1925, no one knew that the impossible was about to happen. Someone was about to sell the Eiffel Tower. Victor Lustig. If you passed him on the street, you wouldn't have looked twice. He wasn't a soldier, not a politician, not even a man of obvious wealth. But the moment he opened his mouth, everything changed. Victor carried himself with the grace and nobility. His hair, slicked back, always neat. His suits, perfectly tailored, the kind worn by men who belonged to boardrooms and smoking lounges. A silk tie, a polished shoe, a briefcase that hinted at serious business. He smiled often, but never too wide, just enough. And when you spoke to him, you felt something hard to explain. Confidence, assurance, a quiet magnetism. Victor Lustig was a man who seemed trustworthy, and trust was his greatest weapon. You see, Victor was no ordinary man. He was a con man, a swindler, but not the kind who picked pockets in alleys or ran street games with dice. No, Victor played a higher game. He knew that the richest cons weren't about force. They were about belief. People wanted to believe in him, and he gave them exactly what they wanted. A gentleman, a businessman, a man of opportunity. By 1925, Lustig had already lived a life full of trickery. He had roamed across Europe, America, and beyond. On ocean liners, he sold fake, money-printed machines to wealthy passengers. The device, nothing more than a wooden box with levers and gears, supposedly printed authentic banknotes. Of course, it did nothing of the sort. But by the time his buyers realized, Lustig was long gone with their fortunes. He moved through cities like a shadow, leaving behind rumors, disbelief, and admiration, because there was an artistry to his crimes. He didn't steal. He persuaded. He didn't demand. He invited. And he never pushed harder than he needed to. Victor Lustig was the kind of man who could make you thank him for robbing you. And now in Paris, Lustig saw his greatest stage yet. The Eiffel Tower, the very heart of the city, was his canvas. The government's financial struggles, the whispers of demolition. For most Parisians, it was idle talk. But for Lustig, it was an opening, a chance to craft a scheme so outrageous, so impossible, that no one would ever expect it. A plan to sell the Eiffel Tower itself. And as impossible as that sounded, Victor Lustig had every intention of making it real. He was ready. The stage was set. And the con of the century was about to begin. Paris was a city of beauty. But behind every cathedral and cafe, there was something else. Paperwork, bureaucracy, Endless government files stacked in dusty offices where clerks pushed pens instead of progress. And inside those files, the whisper: the Eiffel Tower was becoming too expensive to maintain. Rust, repairs, paint. The costs were draining government pockets already burdened by post-war recovery. Some officials began to wonder, what if the tower was no longer worth it? Rumors spread quietly. Perhaps one day it would be dismantled, sold for scrap. Most Parisians dismissed it. Just talk, idle speculation. But Victor Lustig, he listened. To a con man, rumors are not noise. They are opportunity. And Lustig was patient enough to turn whispers into gold. So he crafted his plan. Carefully, he obtained official-looking stationery, forged government seals, drafted letters with a kind of bureaucratic stiffness only an insider would know. When the invitations were finished, they looked flawless. Stamped, signed, stamped again. Letters from the French government itself. And those letters were addressed to a very specific audience, Paris's wealthiest scrap metal dealers. The invitation summoned these men to a private meeting at the Hotel de Crillon, one of the most elegant, exclusive hotels in Paris. A place of chandeliers and marble, with a very air smelled of money and power. The dealers arrived in polished cars, stepping out in tailored suits and top hats. They believed they were answering a government call. Inside, they were ushered to a grand meeting room. Heavy drapes, long oak table, a carafe of wine at the center. And at the head of that table, waiting with calm authority, was Victor Lustig. Polite, charming, impeccably dressed. He welcomed them as though they were trusted confidants brought into a great national secret. Gentlemen, Lustig began, his voice steady. He explained that the Eiffel Tower, though beloved, had become a financial burden. The government had quietly decided that maintaining it was no longer possible. And so, discreetly, without public uproar, they were preparing to sell it, to scrap dealers. To them, the men sat stunned. They exchanged looks, whispered under their breath. Was this possible? Could the government truly be preparing to dismantle Paris's greatest landmark? Lustig let the silence do its work. Then he leaned forward, lowered his voice, and spoke of secrecy. This was not to be discussed outside these walls. It was sensitive, a matter of national dignity. They were being offered a rare chance, not only to profit, but to participate in history. And just like that, the seed was planted. In that elegant hotel room, beneath the glittering chandeliers, Victor Lustig transformed a rumor into reality. The Eiffel Tower was for sale, and these men believed it. They didn't yet know it, but they were walking straight into one of the greatest cons in history. The stage was set. The wealthy scrap dealers believed they had been summoned by the French government itself. They had listened to Lustig's polished speech, seen the forged documents, felt the gravity of secrecy. But now came the test. Who would dare bid for the most famous landmark in Paris? In the Hotel de Crillon, the men leaned forward, calculating. The Eiffel Tower was a giant of steel, more than 7,000 tons of metal. To dismantle it, melt it down, sell it piece by piece would make one man fabulously rich. The bidding began. Some were cautious, whispering figures under their breath. Others more daring, scribbling numbers onto notepads with shaking hands. And all the while, Victor Lustig stood at the head of the table, serene, smiling politely, guiding the conversation with the ease of a maestro conducting a symphony. One man, in particular, wanted the tower more than the rest. A scrap dealer known for his ambition. Wealthy but hungry. Lustig saw it instantly. The way the man leaned in, the way his eyes flickered with greed. This was his mark. So Lustig added pressure. He spoke of urgency, discretion, how the government could not delay. Gentlemen, he said, lowering his voice, this is not a matter of if, but when. The tower must go, and only one of you will be chosen. Hours later, the deal was struck. In a private room, away from the others, the ambitious dealer handed over an envelope thick with cash. Millions in today's money. Payment for the impossible. The man believed he had secured the rights to dismantle the Eiffel Tower. His name would go down in history as the man who profited from Paris's most iconic landmark. And Victor Lustig? He smiled, shook the man's hand, and walked away with his fortune. Within hours, Lustig was gone. He didn't linger in Paris. He didn't risk questions. He bought a ticket, boarded a luxury train, and slipped quietly out of the city. From the carriage window, as the countryside rolled by, he could still see the Eiffel Tower in the distance, standing tall, still in place. And he must have laughed, a deep, satisfied laugh, because he had just sold it without ever owning it. Meanwhile, back in Paris, the scrap dealer waited for instructions. Days passed, weeks. At first, he kept quiet, bound by Lustig's reminder of secrecy. But as nothing happened, as no officials contacted him, the truth began to gnaw. The realization was bitter. He had not bought the Eiffel Tower. He had been conned. But here's the strangest part of all. The man never reported it. Why? Because the humiliation was too great. To admit he had been fooled so spectacularly in such a public way would destroy his reputation. So he swallowed the loss, stayed silent, and the world never knew. And Victor Lustig, he walked away untouched, richer than ever, and ready to try it all again. Paris had been fooled. One man had sold the Eiffel Tower and walked away richer than anyone dared imagine. But the story doesn't end there, because Victor Lustig was not a man who stopped after one victory. He was not content with one unbelievable con. No, he came back for more. Months later, whispers began again. Government officials, they said, were still debating the cost of maintaining the tower. The rumors of dismantling had not gone away. And into this fertile ground of gossip and greed, Victor Lustig returned. He used the same tools, the forged documents, the official stamps, the secretive meetings in Parisian hotels. And once again, scrap dealers leaned forward, eyes glittering with ambition. Could it really be possible? Could they really be the ones to own the tower? This time, though, something changed. One dealer grew suspicious. The offer was too grand, too secretive, and the charm of the man making it just a little too smooth. He went to the police. But by the time the authorities began to investigate, Lustig was already gone, slipped through their fingers once more. From Paris, he vanished across Europe, then to America, and there his legend only grew. Because Victor Lustig wasn't just a man who sold the Eiffel Tower. He was a master con man, fluent in multiple languages, always perfectly dressed, always 2 steps ahead. In the United States, he pulled off dozens of schemes, from counterfeit printing presses to tricking gangsters, even Al Capone himself. Yes, Al Capone. And somehow Lustig survived it all, for years. But no con lasts forever. Eventually, the law caught up with him, arrested, tried, and sentenced to years behind bars. Victor Lustig spent the last chapter of his life in Alcatraz, the island prison built to hold the most dangerous, the most untouchable. The gentleman con man who once sold the Eiffel Tower died not with riches but in a cell. And yet his story lives on, because what Lustig really sold was never just a tower. It was belief, the dream that even the impossible could be real if packaged the right way, the illusion that greed can be turned into gold. And time and again his victims, clever, powerful men, handed him their fortunes willingly, not because they were stupid, but because they wanted to believe. And so the lesson echoes even today, when a deal seems too perfect, too secretive, too urgent, when the promise is so big, so irresistible, that you feel you must act before someone else takes it. That is when you need to stop, pause, and remember the man who sold the Eiffel Tower. Twice. Because the greatest scams are not about the con man at all. They are about us, our greed, our pride, our willingness to believe in shortcuts. Victor Lustig was just a mirror, and in him, the world saw its own reflection.